Welcome everybody, good afternoon. My name is Caroline Hearn. I'm the Specialist Advisor for Early Years Regulatory Policy here at Ofsted, and I'm joined today by colleagues within my team and colleagues from the Department for Education. And we're going to be presenting, just to make sure you're all in the right place, in the right call. This is a webinar focused on the new flexibilities for Childminders. The call will be very much focused on that because we have an hour, so we've got a lot to get through in that hour. I'm aware if you get Ofsted and the department on a call, you may have broader questions, but we will of course take those in the chat and come back to you and make sure they get routed to the right colleagues. So without further ado, I will be handing over to Hannah.
Great, thanks very much, Caroline. So my name's Hannah Sinclair and I am a policy team leader within the provider unit at the Department for Education, and I'm responsible for the implementation of the new Childminder flexibilities. And I also have a colleague of mine with me as well today, Chloe Rowlands. So we'll start off by providing a little bit of a background to why we're actually making these changes and why we're making the changes now. So back in July 2022, the former government announced its plans to reduce the cost of childcare for parents and also to look at boosting the number of childminders and helping more people become childminders, including allowing them to spend more of their time working from non-domestic premises. So following this announcement, the department went through a period of engagement. We talked to key stakeholders and we also ran focus groups with childminders to hear what they thought. And they told us sort of during these discussions about some of the things that prevented them potentially from either joining the profession or contributed to them leaving the profession. So those sorts of things included the restrictions were around limits on childminders to operating on non-domestic premises for more than 50% of their time. They told us about how many childminder applicants fail the registration process due to having a lack of suitable domestic premises. And they also told us about issues relating to the number of childminders or assistants they could work with, which affected their ability to grow their business. It also affected their ability to care for children with additional needs. So those children with SEND needs that might need some additional one-to-one care. So these discussions resulted in provisions being included in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, which we sometimes refer to as the LURA. So that's what that means if you do hear that terminology. And that was passed in October 2023. And then we've been working since that time with Ofsted, local authorities and other stakeholders within the sector to introduce the regulations which came into force on the 1st of November. So what are the changes that came into force on the 1st of November? Well, prior to the 1st of November, at least half of a childminder's provision must have been provided on a domestic premise, and they were limited to working with a maximum of 3 people in total. So what the changes do, they create a new category of childminder without domestic premises, who works entirely from a non-domestic premise. They increase from 3 to 4 the total number of people, so that could be a childminder or an assistant, who can work together under a childminder's registration. They give childminders and childcare on domestic premises greater flexibilities to spend more time operating outside of their home, such as a community hall or a school. And as a result of these changes, we are increasing the number of people needed to provide childcare on domestic premises to 5 or more people providing care. The rules prior to the 1st of November were that had to be 4 people. But for those who had registered prior to the 1st of November, they can continue operating with 4 or more people providing care for childcare on domestic premises. So what are the key differences between childminders with and childminders without domestic premises? This slide sets out some of the key differences and similarities, and I know that you probably have quite a few questions, but Ofsted will be going into quite a bit more detail about what this means in practice in their slides later on in this session. So like existing childminders, the new category must comply with all the requirements of the early years foundation stage statutory framework for childminders. We have made clarificatory amendments to the EYFS to make it clear that the term childminder applies to both childminders and childminders without domestic premises. Childminders will be able to choose how much time they spend operating from a non-domestic premise, as long as they spend some of their time operating from their domestic premise, which is normally their home. Where childminders are unable to or don't want to work from their home, they would register as the new category of childminder without domestic premises. So this means that they would never be able to work from their home. So that includes for drop-offs or pickups of children. Both Ofsted and Childminder agencies will continue to regulate the safety and the quality of provision in line with their current legislative responsibilities. And whilst we stay on this slide, I wanted to just cover sort of a few questions that have come up in sort of various of the sessions that we've run about these changes. So I think one of the questions we get asked quite often is, what is the distinction between a childminder without domestic premises and childcare on non-domestic premises, such as a nursery? And could this cause conflict with the sector or inconsistencies across standards for different provider types? So like childminders with domestic premises, the new category must comply with all the requirements of the EYFS statutory framework for childminders. The new category will also be limited to operating with no more than 3 other people. So 4 people in total working together, which can either be other childminders or assistants. In contrast, those registered as childcare on non-domestic premises, so that could be a nursery or full daycare centre, must comply with the EYFS statutory framework for group and school-based providers. And there is no maximum number of people required to operate as childcare on non-domestic premises. And it would be up to those registering to decide which operational model may suit them best. And we've also been asked about whether these changes risk losing the unique selling point of childminders. So I know that it's often referred to as home-based childcare, and whether this may cause some confusion for parents. So childminders can already spend 50% of their time operating outside their home, and we expect them to provide the same high quality provision regardless of the setting they operate from. The changes will give people more choice depending on how they want to operate their business. So this may include for childminders considering whether any costs may be offset by increased income from expanding their business to care for more children, or working in a premises that may be better located and more appealing to parents. Like childminders with domestic premises, the new category must comply with all the requirements of the early years foundation stage framework for childminders. And it shouldn't impact on the quality of provision or the safeguarding being provided. The EYFS stipulates that childminders must share details of their registration with parents, and this will be extended to those childminders without domestic premises. And then how will childminders be supported to find suitable non-domestic premises? We would suggest to childminders that they work with their local authorities because they are best placed to support childminders to find suitable non-domestic premises due to their local knowledge. So that will work in a very similar way to how it currently works. At the same time, a childminder may want to use their local networks and knowledge to also find them. And we're working very closely with local authorities to support introduction of the changes. The flexibilities are about providing more choice and scope for childminders to work in a way that suits them and their business. There will be little difference with the current system. Childminders will have the option to work with one additional person, so a total of 4 working together. And as a consequence, childcare on domestic premises will be required to work with groups of 5 or more providing care. And those providing childcare will have a choice about which option suits them the best and which EYFS they want to follow. I thought it would be helpful as well to just provide, this slide here just sets out a higher level timeline. So as I said earlier, the changes were introduced on the 1st of November and supporting guidance has been published by Ofsted and Childminder agencies, and we'll share links to those within the slide packs. I wanted to tell you a little bit about the Childminder consultation as well, because some of you may be aware that the Department for Education consulted on some measures to support childminders earlier this year. So the consultation ran from March until May. I just wanted to say a huge thank you to those who did take the time to respond to that consultation. We are still analysing the responses and we will be able to provide some feedback on this soon. So I think this sort of slide here summarises some of the key themes that came out of the consultation, and I just wanted to provide reassurance that those are being sort of taken forward and are being considered. And next steps, we're really keen to sort of work with lots of people within the sector, those who want to become childminders, existing childminders, as well as other delivery partners, to really sort of support promotion of the changes and to help you to understand them. And that's why we're trying to do as many events like this as possible with our colleagues Ofsted. And I've also included some links where you can provide a little bit more information in this slide pack. So now I'll hand over to my colleague, Glenn. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Hannah. Hi, everyone. I'm Glenn Jump. I'm the Childcare Reform Project Manager working in the Early Years Regulatory Policy team. Myself and Laura will be going through some Ofsted slides for you. So we put a little bit of an agenda here, just to let you know that we'll be taking each change in turn. So we'll be running through each provider type and what that means in terms of the changes. And then we've got a helpful diagram, choosing the right registration for you. And then we'll cover upcoming guidance that's been published and communications and some further resources after that. So the registration timescales. These have not changed with the introduction of the changes. It's still 12 weeks for the early years register applications and 10 weeks for the childcare register applications. If you're already registered, however, and are submitting an approval to work on a different premises or in a new way, these are usually much quicker. This is all dependent on whether we need to repeat any new checks or whether we need to visit a premises. And we use information that we hold to determine whether we need to do that. You'll want to factor in these timescales if you intend to set up new provision in future. And yes, they're average timescales, so some are quicker and some unfortunately do take longer sometimes. Our role here is to make sure that registration process is as smooth as possible, and we want to register providers without any undue delay. We've recently blogged a few months ago about a new change that we implemented, a welcome call, which we've found has helped to speed up the application process for new applicants. So we call applicants right at the start of the process to help set out the expectations of what to expect for the 10 or 12 weeks. That involves scheduling in a visit right at the start, and then working towards that date as much as possible. But if you have any further suggestions or feedback on that process, then please take a look at our blog about what that means, and then you can provide a comment on there. And I'll hand over to Laura.
Thanks, Glenn. Hi, everybody. My name's Laura Teague, and I'm the lead professional for the childcare reforms here at Ofsted. So firstly, we're going to look at the changes in order. So the first one is the childminder without domestic premises, so the new provider type. We know that it might not be the most catchy of titles, but it's really important that this provider type has a clear name, so it's clear to parents and to the sector that this type of childminder will not be at any time working from domestic premises. It's also worth noting that in the legislation that's been passed, that this provider must give notice to at least one parent of every child they care for to inform them that they're not allowed to work at any time from domestic premises. So on the screen, you can see some elements that make a childminder without domestic premises. They are still childminders, therefore the expectations on the care that are provided, when they must register, who they can care for, are the same as on this slide. The only difference being that they can only provide care on approved non-domestic premises. When we talk about non-domestic premises, we mean a premises that's not wholly or mainly used as a dwelling or a home. So there are many more examples, but these are things such as a house that nobody lives in, it's not occupied, a secure or defined outdoor space, a village hall, a school. But if there are any specific premises that you would like to talk about, please do add them into our Q&A. We can take them away. But it's any premises that's not wholly or mainly used for someone to live in. You can also see there, as we've discussed already, that it's now a maximum of 4 people working together to provide or assist with childcare. That can be 1 childminder, 3 assistants, 4 childminders working together, or anything in between. So any non-domestic premises must be approved by Ofsted or the Childminders Agency before a childminder without domestic premises provides care from it. You can do this at the point of registration, where you can apply to add multiple non-domestic premises to that registration, or it can be done after the point of registration using an EYA form. When we get this application, it's risk assessed and managed initially by our regulatory team, and they look at a number of factors before deciding whether we need to do a visit to that premises or not. We've already said providers cannot use any domestic premises at any time, including drop-off and collection of children. And this does include anything on the footprint of that domestic premises. So if it was a building in the garden of that domestic premises, for example, that would be classed as part of a domestic premises. It is an offence to provide childcare as a childminder without domestic premises without having that registration approved and without having any non-domestic premises approved as well. Although you can have multiple approved non-domestic premises, you can only provide care from one of those premises at any one time. So for example, if you have an assistant or multiple assistants, you cannot leave them in one non-domestic premises providing care and provide care yourself from another. It is the provision in one non-domestic premises at one time. And it's important that childminders without domestic premises let us know how they're using those premises and how they're splitting their time, sort of the days and times in which they're using which premises. We'll ask for that information at points such as registration, inspection, and any time we communicate with you as well. So assistance can be left for up to 2 hours, and that's per child per day. So you can't leave a child, for example, with one assistant for 2 hours and then another. It's per child per day. But the childminder without domestic premises remains responsible for the childcare at all times. Therefore, as already explained, they can't provide care in another premises and leave the assistant. It's for them to be able to do tasks outside of that premises, but relating to the childcare at all times. Childminders must inform Ofsted and the Childminders Agency of changes to people that are looking after children. So we want to know about anybody working on that non-domestic premises looking after children as we complete checks on those people, and you will get a suitability decision on those people. If you want to have anybody else working within that premises, say, for example, as a chef or a cook, but not looking after children, the suitability of that person is the childminder without domestic premises responsibility, and they will need to complete their own suitability checks. We don't check household member suitability for childminders without domestic premises. Therefore, if you are somebody who lives with somebody who is disqualified from registration, we will not be checking their suitability for you to register. What we do ask for is information about anybody that you live with that's under the age of 16, purely for the purpose of completing suitability checks. That information is discarded after the point of registration. When we look at inspection for this type of childminder, we already have providers who spend up to 50% of their time on non-domestic premises using the tools available to us, so the EIF inspection framework and the inspection handbooks. It's important to remember this is not a new inspection type or something that we don't already complete. It will be the same type of inspection, the same inspection activities, the same information considered, and the same professional curiosity and judgments used to determine the outcome of this inspection, and that's regardless of the premises. Although childminders without domestic premises can now work with an additional assistant or co-childminder, again, it's important to remember we are completing the inspection of that childminder registration, and therefore any observations or conversations that are held feed into that process, but shouldn't elongate it. So it shouldn't be a longer inspection process with having another person working with you. In terms of that inspection, we've also been asked about where that inspection will take place. If a childminder without domestic premises has multiple non-domestic premises approved. When we do the notification call and we discuss with you where you operate from, we want to know where you usually provide care for those children on those different days and times. And wherever the inspection falls in terms of the day and time, we would visit the premises usually that you provide care for at that day and time. We don't expect you to use different premises or do anything different than you normally do. It's for us to find out what that looks like for you and fit the inspection in within that picture.
Question. So you do have one question that's come through for this session, folks. Glenn, you did talk about the registration timelines, but we've had a question about why do currently registered childminders have to complete the full 12-week process to register as a childminder without domestic premises? There should be a shorter application as they are in effect just registering a new setting. If you'd like to take that.
I can take that.
Thank you, Glenn.
Thanks, Caroline. Yes, as I covered at the start, applications to work in different ways. We may not need to do the full level of checks depending on if we already have that information and someone's already considered suitable. We might take into consideration where that application is applying to work from. If that's an address that we know, we measure up all the information that we have and determine whether we do need to do a visit or not. So applications to work in different ways are generally much quicker, but those 10 and 12-week application timescales are for brand new applications. I hope that answers it.
Thanks, Glenn. I think that does. I think it's the clear point is it's a brand new, different registration. You're applying for something completely different. There's two different ways to register as a childminder, and you pick either one. And if you want to swap, it is a new registration from scratch. But as you've said, we do know. We do have information about those individuals which might make that process quicker. Another question is, can I confirm that checks will need to be done on household members under the age of 16 years? Laura, do you want to take that one?
So, yes. The information for any people that live in the house that are under the age of 16, purely for the purpose of doing checks on the childminder without domestic premises. For example, we ask for information from social services, local authorities, etc. And we hold that information while we do those checks. But at the point of registration, we then discard that information. And we're not checking the household members. We're just using that information to do the checks on the applicant applying to be a childminder without domestic premises.
Thank you, Laura. There's another question asking us to clarify the suitability checks for household for those over 16 years plus. I think it's just understanding that, I'll hand over to you, Laura, about household checks.
Yeah, so for childminders without domestic premises, we won't be doing any household member checks on anybody aged 16 and over. We will only be doing checks for anybody looking after children at the non-domestic premises. So if you live with somebody who's 18, we will not be taking information about them to do household checks, because you're not permitted to work from a domestic premises. Hopefully that answers that one.
That's brilliant, thank you. And that aligns to our policy with other non-domestically registered providers. We don't do household member checks. Specifically, if you were running a day nursery, we wouldn't be checking your family because it's not care that's happening in your domestic home. So I hope that helps. There's no more questions now, so I'll hand back over to the panel for the next part of the presentation.
Thanks so much. So I'll run through the Childminder changes. So this is Childminder working on domestic premises. So Childminders can now provide care on a domestic premises and any approved non-domestic premises for some of their time. So you'll see a screenshot there of the previous form. You might recognise that was applying to work for up to 50% of the time on non-domestic premises. The Department for Education's changes has now removed the 50% limit. The form is now titled applying to work for some of the time on non-domestic premises. So we've had questions in the past about why the DfE are not saying 100% of their time. The department and Ofsted, we want it to be clear that domestically registered providers do need to spend some of their time on domestic premises. So this is how you divide your time between two settings. So it's completely up to you how much time you spend on the domestic and non-domestic settings and how you divide that time. That can be any time within a rolling year. So it could be one day, it could be 1 month, you could split it 1 week at a time. It's completely up to you. Childminders must gain approval from Ofsted or their childminding agency before they use any non-domestic premises. Domestic premises must be suitable, but you can now spend most or the majority of the time at the non-domestic site. You then must tell us where you're spending the time and if you move domestic premises, obviously, but we don't usually need to approve this. So it is a legal requirement to notify Ofsted of any new people living or working on the domestic premises where childminding is taking place, as Laura's just covered. So now there can be a maximum of 4 people providing or assisting with the childcare, and that can be, for example, 1 childminder and 3 assistants, or a mix of co-childminders working together, but that maximum is 4. If there are, for example, more than 4 people working on a domestic premises, that would constitute group provision. So if you don't have a group provision registration, that would be unregistered childcare. So that's a change from 3 people working together to 4 people together to provide that additional flexibility. And you can see a screenshot of the application form there of how to report new adults in the home. Any questions?
Further to the last set of questions, Glenn, somebody's just come back and said that they're still not quite clear why there are 2 different types of childminders and they can't just use their existing registration to operate childminder without domestic premises, because our application forms look similar. I wonder if you just want to take a question in respect of how it is something very different.
Yeah, so we'll go into this later. There's a really helpful slide helping people decide what kind of provider they want to be. If you're already registered as a childminder, you might not want to do a brand new application. You might want to work in a different way, such as I've just covered, applying to work for some of your time on non-domestic premises. So then you can divide your time however you see fit between those 2 premises. So there's quite a few different flexibilities available, and the slide later on with the diagram should really help visualize that.
Thank you, Glenn, really helpful.
We've had another previous question about what counts as wholly or mainly in terms of a domestic premises. So just to clarify, we cannot define a minimum of number of nights that means for somebody to constitute living there, because just because somebody is sleeping at an address, that might not actually constitute as living there. The legislation is not prescriptive of this. So ultimately, it is for a provider to satisfy whether somebody is wholly or mainly for that premises to be considered domestic. And also a question about if a premises becomes temporarily unavailable. So if you are a childminder who works from domestic and non-domestic premises, and you, for example, have major building work being completed at your domestic premises, because you have worked from that domestic premises for some of the time, you could then work from any approved non-domestic premises for some of your time until that domestic premises is available again. So just to clarify that as well.
And back to you.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So childcare on domestic premises. So again, as Laura's just covered, the same information applies in relation to what we defined domestic premises. Childcare on domestic premises is group provision, so they must comply with the requirements of group provision, including staff qualifications, ratios, etc., in the group provision EYFS document published by the EYFS. Both those documents, the Childminder EYFS and the group provision EYFS, were updated on the 1st of November. So you should be able to see the difference in requirements there. As well as what I've just covered with Childminders, childcare on domestic premises providers can also apply to spend most of their time or some of their time on non-domestic premises. They would use that same form. Again, it can be the majority of their time. It's completely up to you how you divide your time between those two settings. You just can't use your registration to do it both at the same time. So you have to split your time between the domestic and non-domestic settings. Thank you. So if registered providers want to move domestic premises, it would be a new registration and a new unique reference number. And as the childcare on domestic premises is registered at the primary premises as the childcare on non-domestic premises, this is different for a childminder as they are registered as the person and not the attached to the premises. So childminders are registered as individuals, and for childcare on domestic premises, we registered the provider, so the legal entity, the registered provider. Again, they must go through the same additional premises process as childminders to add any additional non-domestic premises. So there is guidance online about childcare on domestic premises. It's standalone guidance which tells you everything you need to know. And we have also recently published a blog which sets out how to let us know via the EY2 form of any people living or working at the premises where childcare takes place. Again, as I said previously, we try to blog around areas of policy that generate a lot of questions to Ofsted. So we try to really help explain that in as helpful terms as possible, what that means in the process and what to expect. So really taking our policy in our guidance and explaining it with examples. If the number of people frequently falls below 5 people working together, the provider may wish to register as a childminder for those times. So now that childminders can work with 4 people in total, childcare on domestic premises from the 1st of November has to be 5 or more people providing or assisting with care to register. So that means 5 EY2 forms on the application form. So that could be 5, 6, as many people as you want, but it has to be a minimum of 5. And the next slide, please. Here we go, yeah. So there are currently 211 childcare on domestic premises providers registered with Ofsted, and there are 11 with childminder agencies. All these changes you can decide whether to register with Ofsted or a childminder agency. We're working very closely with the agencies and they're figuring out what these changes mean for them. So there are 211 already registered. These do not need to re-register, so they can continue working with 4 people assisting with the provision of childcare. Any questions? Caroline?
Back to questions. Glenn, a lot of the questions here are really about the childminders without domestic premises, so I won't ask them in this slot because I think it'd be good for Laura to do the next slot, and then we can come back to those questions. So I am seeing those questions and I will ask them in a bit.
Great. Any on childcare on domestic premises? But as I said, there is guidance on our website, so please do have a look at that if it's something that you're considering applying for. Thank you.
We have got one, Glenn, that's about if domestically registered childminder and you want to move house, do you need to register again? So for childminders, if you want to move from working from one domestic premises to another domestic premises, you just need to let us know that you're moving to a different domestic premises. Childminders without domestic premises, if you want to move from a non-domestic premises to another non-domestic premises, you need to let us know and you need to have that new non-domestic premises approved. If you want to simply add another premises to your registration, you would fill in an additional premises form and have that approved. But for childcare on domestic providers, so a group provision within someone's home, if you want to move to working at a different domestic premises, because you are registered to provide care at that domestic premises, you would need to apply to register with Ofsted or a Childminder agency again, and that would be a new registration process. But like Glenn's already said, if you are already known to us, that process may be slightly quicker.
And I've just spotted another question as well from Danica. How does childcare on domestic premises differ from childminder on domestic premises? So this is in relation to how many people can work together and which requirements they follow. So a childminder can work in total with 4 people under a childminder registration. So that could be the childminder working with 3 assistants, or it could be 4 childminders working together. But then childcare on domestic premises is 5 or more people assisting with the provision of childcare from the 1st of November 2024. So a childminder would follow the childminder EYFS requirements, and a childcare on domestic premises provider would follow the group provision requirements. And it's completely up to you, depending on how many people you plan to work with. It might be that, given the change in the number of people, if you're a group provision requirement, you may now want to work under a childminder registration because there are fewer requirements in terms of qualifications and ratios, and fewer people working together.
And just one more I've spotted on childcare on domestic there. So can we confirm that a childcare on domestic premises provider can potentially operate for up to 90% of their time from non-domestic? So when there's no sort of percentage mark on that, it is the 50% limit has been removed. So as a childcare on domestic premises provider, you can now spend some, which can be the majority of your time, working from any approved non-domestic premises. So you just have to spend some of your time, and that's not defined by per day or per week, that's just some of your time working from a domestic premises. Gain approval for any non-domestic premises, and then let Ofsted or your childminding agency know how you're dividing your time between the premises that you've got approved. And it's down to you how you split that time and what you feel works best for you and for the children in your care. Brilliant.
I'll hand over to you, Laura.
Thanks. So when we look at choosing what's right for you, it's really important that before you register or before you consider registering again with Ofsted, that you understand what different provider types can do. So it's really important you think about how many people you want to work with or together as a group of at any single time. So if that is always going to be up to and including 4 people, you may wish to consider registering as a childminder, whether that's on domestic premises or without domestic premises. If there are any times where there are going to be 5 or more people working together at any one single time, you would need to then consider registering as a group provision, whether that's childcare on domestic or childcare on non-domestic. Once you've decided how many people you're going to work together as a group of, you can then start looking at what type of premises you may wish to provide care from. So with childminders, if you at any time want to care for children from a domestic premises, and that could be as a home child carer, from somebody else's home, from your own home, then you would need to register to work from domestic premises, so a childminder registration. If you do not at any point want to work from a non-domestic premises, you need to register as a childminder without domestic premises. Similarly, looking at group provision, if you want to spend your time on some of your time on domestic premises, you would need to register as childcare on domestic premises. And if you want to work from a non-domestic premises at all times, you would register as a childcare on non-domestic premises. There is also, as you can see there, an arrow with small daycare. So if you are wanting to work as a group provision, or your legal entity is a company, for example, and you want to register as a company, we only register childminders as sole traders in their own right. You would then look at registering as a group provision. There's no minimum limit of people working together for a childcare on non-domestic premises, so a nursery, preschool, etc. So hopefully that helps you to think about what you might want to do and what you might want to register as moving forward. Back to you, Glenn.
Thanks so much. So you may have seen some of these published on the 1st of November. But here as a quick reminder, we published a news story. That was a joint news story between Ofsted and the Department for Education about the changes. That was on the 1st. That just sets out that the changes, and with a link to the Childminder without domestic premises guidance that you can see on the right of the screen. So that new provider type guidance is there, and everything you need to know can be found within that document. In the middle as well, we've got a screenshot of our Ofsted News YouTube page, and we've been publishing videos over the past week about these changes, short, snappy 1-minute videos to try and explain those verbally, to try and increase understanding of the changes, and so you can understand whether you want to make use of the flexibilities. We've also updated all our other guidance to make reference to the changes, the Childminder without domestic premises and the additional flexibilities. So you may have seen our other guidance documents be updated at the same time. So a few months ago, we reorganised all our external guidance into 3 collections. So a collection is what central government call a collection of documents on gov.uk. So on a collection, you can see, for example, 10 or more pieces of guidance in one area about one thing. So every piece of Ofsted guidance and early years has now been reorganised into the registration, regulation and inspection collections. So if you want to find out anything about registration, you can click on the early years and childcare registration collection. These hyperlinks will be within the slides that will attach to this webinar as well, so you can root through there and see all of our new guidance and all our updated guidance. And then the regulation collection includes some, for example, our enforcement policy and how we handle information, and then obviously the EIF inspection handbook can be found in the early years inspections collection. So I hope that's really helpful for you to make sure you can find the guidance in relation to what you need to know. You should be able to find it within one of those 3 links. And here are some screenshots of our latest blogs. As always, we're welcome for any feedback on these or ideas for future blogs on areas that are more misunderstood, or where you have questions or how we can improve our policy. We've recently blogged on the EY2 form, for example, and previously we've done one on the holiday activities and food programme and whether that's exempt or whether you need to register with Ofsted. And you can see screenshots of other ones there as well. But we're all ears for ideas of future blogs as well. Any questions, Caroline?
So questions. Thank you, everybody. I think it's super clear now, thanks to Laura's grid, that the new Childminder without domestic premises, whilst a Childminder is a totally different thing. So it is about choosing which one you want to be registered as when you apply. And there's different checks and different requirements guiding both, so that's why it is a completely different type of registration. So it is a different application process, it's a whole new application process, because we check different people and we look for different things, but still with the EYFS requirements to be met. So looking at the questions we have, with regard to square feet, how do we work out how much space we have and how many children we can have? Can we ask our LA to come and check? Who'd like to take that question?
I can take that one. So in terms of the square foot, so the indoor space requirements are noted in the YFS, and you do need to follow those requirements whether you're working from a domestic or non-domestic premises. So you would look at those requirements and make sure you are meeting those. In terms of the local authority, absolutely, that could be a conversation you have with them, but from an Ofsted point of view, it's for you to determine what space you have and how many children you can then have in that space whilst meeting the requirements, and it's for you to just then make sure you're working within the ratio requirements as well. We have previously had a question about outdoor space as well, so there are no outdoor space requirements. They are for indoor space, domestic and non-domestic premises only.
Thank you, really helpful. I have another question. Somebody's clarifying that as an existing registered domestic childminder, if they decided they needed to move house, do they have to apply to register again? That's their takeaway from this.
So they don't need to reapply. They just need to let us know the new address. For example, that could be a childminder wanting to work from a co-childminder's address or their parents' address if they find that that premises is more suitable. They would have to notify Ofsted of that change, and we then would carry out any checks on any new members of the household or anyone new living or working at that premises. But that's not an application, that's a notification requirement set by the Department for Education and the UIFS. So you'd notify us, let us know, and we'd update the certificate and carry out any new checks on new individuals.
Thank you, Glenn, really helpful. We have another question now. If someone has a caravan or garage with adults living in it on the property, and this is a domestically registered childminder, do these adults need to be checked? Who'd like to take that question? Is that you, Laura, having technical issues there?
Yeah, I can take that question.
Thank you.
So in terms of the domestic footprint, we look at anybody that is living on the domestic footprint when we do household members checks. If there are particular circumstances where for example, you've separated the lands completely and it's just on the footprint and they have no access to the house, they have no access to any of the grounds, etc., separate entrances, we take all that information into consideration when we talk to you about who we're going to do checks upon. But it's household members, so anybody living on the domestic footprint we would gather the information for to do checks, and we would require DBS, etc., for anybody classed as a household member on that domestic footprint. But if you have a specific scenario that's needs a little bit more discussion, that is something that we can go through with you, but also it's something that will be discussed at the welcome call that our registration team do as well.
Thank you, Laura, really helpful. There's another, more of an observation. Childminder without domestic premises seems like a childminder on domestic premises, only the domestic premises sounds like they have more flexibility within what they can do. I don't know if the panel want to add any more to that. I think it's just, as Hannah said in her intro, it's giving you that flexibility. So yeah, I think it does what it says on the tin. It does give you more flexibility. And as Hannah said in her intro, it's for people whose domestic premises just really aren't suitable, or they just don't want to use it. It gives you another option to do something a bit different. But as you can now, you're domestically registered, you've got lots of flex to use to operate non-domestically. Can't see anything new coming in now, folks. I think we're almost at time as well, so give everybody another second or two to put some more questions in. Otherwise, I think we will say good afternoon and let everybody go off to do whatever they're doing for their busy afternoons. Anybody from the panel have any final words they'd like to add?
No, thank you, Caroline.
Okay. Well, no more questions have come in while I've given you those few minutes, so I will just thank the panel members today. That's been a really informative session. Thank you for your time, and thank you for everybody who's joined. I hope that's made more sense of these changes. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody.